Hello everyone, welcome back. I'm Rico and this is Relatively Sound, the channel that was born under a blue sky. Today I am back with another review, and this time we're going to be reviewing the latest album from Jack White, right there, titled Frozen Charolette.
It's gonna sound like this. Welcome to the end of the world.
This marks Jack's 7th solo studio album, and it was released last week. And it's an album that comes only 2 years after his last album, which was No Name back in 2024. And before I get into my review of this album, I think you need to know where I'm coming from as a Jack White fan, and specifically what I thought of the last album to really understand my thoughts on this album. No Name was an album that I feel like a lot of hardcore Jack White fans loved because it was that return to that bluesy rock that a lot of people associated with the White Stripes and just with a lot of his projects in general. I enjoyed the album, but I will say this. I think I enjoyed it less than most fans. Things I loved about No Name was I do love how it was just a kind of back to basic rock straight ahead album. I like that the release was really, there was no frills. He just released it out of the blue. And I think the album, the first half is extremely strong. My issues kind of come when it comes to the sequencing in the second half of the album, because the first half, I love songs like Old Scratch Blues, the opener, the single That's How I'm Feeling. I really love It's Rough on the Rats. Archbishop Harold Holmes is another great track. And Bombing Out is like one that I always get stuck in my head. But when I look on the second half of the album, there's a lot of songs that, even though I've heard this album quite a bit, I have a hard time right now remembering how these songs go. Something like Underground, Number One with a Bullet, Morning at Midnight, Missionary. Really the only song in the second half that I really remember and love is the closing track, Terminal Arch Enemy Ending. And I think another reason why I didn't love this album as much as other fans is because I'm just not as big of a fan of this sound, even though this is kind of what Jack has built his career upon. I just kind of prefer when Jack maybe puts more of his own spin on it, or when he's venturing outside of his comfort zone. So when you look at other projects, I mean, I really like the White Stripes, but I much prefer the Raconteurs. I also really like his other solo albums where he's doing more maybe acoustic, like something on Entering Heaven Alive. I also really like Blunderbuss. Or when he's experimenting more, something like Boarding House Reach or Fear of the Dawn. And I especially like Fear of the Dawn because he took the inspiration of the experimentalness of Boarding House Reach, which I liked, but it took me a long time to get into it. But he kind of combined it with his other genres and sounds and made it a little bit more accessible. So when No Name came out, I will say I maybe wasn't craving that style of songwriting from Jack as much as other fans. So a lot of fans or critics love No Name. I enjoyed it, but not as much. So now with Frozen Charolette, the question is, where did Jack go after that return to the blues rock form on No Name? This is kind of an interesting album, and it's kind of hard for me to describe what I feel about it. I have given it like a whole week to listen to it, and I felt like I needed that whole week because on a first listen, I was like, this is good, and I think the sequencing for sure is better than No Name. But I'm like, is it really that different than No Name? And I think a lot of fans will probably agree with me and say it does kind of maybe sound like No Name leftovers. But when people say that, they are kind of using it almost as an insult and a way of saying like, these songs weren't strong enough for No Name. And I don't think that's the case. I think of it as these are just more kind of No Name sounding songs. But if I'm being honest, I actually think the songwriting on some of these songs are a little better. Like when I look at the track list and certain songs, like the opening track, God and the Broken Ribs, that sounds like a combination of Boarding House Reach, Fear of the Dawn, and No Name. It has that spoken word vocal delivery that he does on No Name, like on an Archbishop Harold Holmes. But then it has like these solo breaks for like the bass, the drums, and guitar that you would hear on like Boarding House Reach. But then it has some of the guitar tones and just energy that Fear the Dawn had. You also have a song like You'll Never Fix Me that has these explosive guitar riffs that kind of come out of nowhere. You'll hear one and then you'll hear another one in the background. They're really fast. They're really in your face. And that kind of reminds me of something like Over and Over and Over. But then you have like other textures throughout the album. There's a lot of organ on this album, on something like the opening track. You also have the really cool and dark and a little bit more slower guitar riff and organ riff on the closing track, Neighbors Blues, which I really dig. And then you got some like punk rock vibes on a song like She's in a Frenzy or Thick as Thieves. And I just feel like this album maybe has a little bit more variety than a No Name. I will say, though, it doesn't have as much variety as some of his other solo albums. I just think that Frozen Charolette has a little bit more to offer. And I think that's where some people, and especially Jack White fans, won't like it as much as No Name because it's a little bit of everything. And I think some fans just want as much of that No Name sound as possible. Most fans would die if there was a White Stripes reunion. And I'm just not one of those fans. I'd way be more interested in a fourth Raconteurs album than a new White Stripes album. In fact, my favorite White Stripe albums are the ones where there's a little bit more variety, like Icky Thump, Get Behind Me Satan, Elephant. That said, I don't think this album's perfect. The thing that kind of rubbed me a little the wrong way on No Name that does kind of on this album as well is the production. On No Name, it made a little bit more sense. The album production was really raw, and that's because a lot of the songs sounded raw. There was a lot of, I feel like, distortion, a little compression. His vocals never sounded super clean, and it kind of fit the songs. Even if I didn't love the songwriting as much, it kind of fit. Even though, when I spun it on vinyl, I was expecting it to sound just a lot better than the digital version, and it didn't. I'm like, okay, this makes sense. On this album, unfortunately, you have songs where the guitars drown out the vocals. Or I think the biggest complaint I have on the production side of this album are the drums. And that sucks because, you have a lot of talented players on this album. On most of the songs, you have Patrick Keeler on drums, who's the drummer for the Raconteurs. He's one of my favorite drummers. And his performance on these songs are fantastic. When you listen to songs like God in the Broken Ribs, You'll Never Fix Me, Nobody Knows. Those are fantastic drumming parts. On some of those songs, especially on something like You'll Never Fix Me, the cymbals just sound so washed out and kind of hard to hear. And I just feel like on these songs, they just needed to be cleaned up a little bit. I also have to give a shout out to bassist Dominic Davis because he's been with Jack for the last couple of tours. And I actually had the pleasure of seeing him live when he filled in with Jason Isbell on the 400 unit when I saw them on the Weather Vanes tour. And I do feel like you actually hear him a lot on these songs, especially on the opening track. He has a little bass fill part that sounds fantastic. He has some really cool fills during songs like You'll Never Fix Me, All Alone Again. I love the playing on all this album. Jack White guitar parts sound great. I do like his vocal deliveries on most of these songs. Again, the drum sounds fantastic. Organ sounds great. It's just the production, I think, holds it back at times. And that's a little disappointing because I like a lot of these songs. I do love the opening track. Probably my favorite song on the entire album so far is All Alone Again. I love that little slidey guitar riff that starts the song. It's really like bum, bum, bum. And then it just gets into those classic rock guitar groove that a lot of people have said sounds like Led Zeppelin. I like the lyrics. I like his vocal performance. I love the guitar solos. And the production on this song actually sounds fitting. It's a little bit more cleaned up. The drums are more audible. And everything's just working well with one another. Again, same could be said about the closing track, Neighbors Blues. That opening guitar riff, I just really enjoy. It's more of a laid-back song, but then it builds. You get into the solo. Only thing I don't love about this song, maybe, is Jack White's vocal effects, where it's a lot of the echo. Mostly because he kind of did it on an earlier track with She's in a Frenzy, and it worked for that song. I think on Neighbors Blues, I don't really need to hear it again. It's another song where I like the lyrics. He brings in his threes that he loves, talking about three crows, and about how neighbors aren't helpful unless you need them. And overall, I think it just makes a really strong album closer. His last couple albums have had great closers, by the way. I'm still really enjoying Dollar Bill. That one keeps growing on me. I love the opening guitar riff that gets into more of the slide part. That chorus where he sings about did it for the love and the dollar bill gets stuck in my head. And I do really like the music of a song like Raising the Grain, where the drums have a little bit more space and I feel like the song goes in different places. I like the kind of punk energy of She's in a Frenzy. Would normally be my style of song, but I think Jack pulls it off really well. Nobody Knows. I like how dramatic the song is and how it builds. I like there's a line where he says, I need you as much as like elephants need shoes. I thought that was funny. But there are a couple songs that like I don't hate or dislike. They haven't made a huge impression on me. Thick as Thieves is one of the more shorter songs in the album, but it doesn't stick with me as much. There's Nobody There. Even though I like the main guitar groove and riff, I just feel like there's nothing super special about that song. And I think I Can't Believe What I'm Hearing is another one that maybe will have to grow on me. I know a lot of fans seem to really like it, but it hasn't grown on me yet. A song that is kind of growing on me still is Making Contact. I like how he talks about he's content making contact. I just like to play on words a lot. And that's another thing with this album too. I just feel like I'm listening and paying attention more to the lyrics than I did on No Name. And some of that is for the better, and some of that maybe not. I do like the kind of retelling of Adam and Eve on the opening track. I like All Alone Again. I like a lot of the lyrics about finding a needle in a haystack and burning it down. Again, Making Contact. I love the feeling content, making contact. Dollar Bill is really interesting about like he's singing like, you know, he did it for the love, but also to make money. And even on a song like You'll Never Fix Me, you know, I did go into this album thinking, you know, with the announce of his recent divorce that this would maybe be more of a divorce album, and maybe so with that song and with She's in a Frenzy. But I when I read that song title, You'll Never Fix Me, I thought, oh, it's going to be a little corny. But I love the music so much, I actually didn't really mind the lyrics maybe being a little like cliche. But there's some songs on this album where the lyrics maybe don't stand out as much. The second track on the album, I haven't really delved too much into the lyrics. Raising the Grain, even though I like the music, I do think it's a little bit of that Dr. Seuss rhyming where he's talking about like seed oils and blood boils. The plus side though is that I do think that Jack's getting back into his lyrical game, because on an album like Fear of the Dawn, Boarding House Reach, especially on Entering Heaven Alive, I really loved his lyrics. And I think on No Name, it was more about like the attitude of the songs and the music more so than the lyrics. And I think overall, the thing I want to end with is that I think this album is more balanced overall. When I'm going through the track list and I'm listening to it over and over, like, yeah, there might be a song like There's Nobody There that I don't love as much, but then I'll get a You'll Never Fix Me that I love. Then maybe I'll get a I Can't Believe What I'm Hearing, which I think is just okay, but then I'll get All Alone Again. And it starts and ends fantastically. And I think that's important too. You don't want an album to begin with like your least favorite song, but you don't also want it to end disappointingly as well. So overall, I think I am liking this actually more than No Name. I understand more people will like No Name, and I think if you told me you think No Name is the better album, I could maybe even agree. I just think Frozen Charolette is a little bit more my style of music. I hope it's still that maybe with the next album, Jack will do something a little bit more outside his comfort zone. Even if that's returning to the Raconteurs or even Dead Weather. Dead Weather is just the one group of his I just don't really care for. But if that meant him making different styles of music, I'd be all for it. But yeah, that's my overall thoughts on this album. I do think right now I'm going to give it a 7.5. Maybe by the end of the year, it could creep up to an 8. And I think like if I had to go back and rate No Name, to many people's surprise, that one's more of a 7 to a 7.5. So again, I do like this one just a little bit better. Is it still, you know, one of his best solo albums? No, I would still give that to Blunderbuss, Fear of the Dawn, Entering Heaven Alive. But I definitely like it more than Lazaretto. I think this one is more accessible than A Boarding House Reach. And I'm just glad Jack's still making a lot of music. He's making a lot of content. He only had a 2-year gap, and then within those 2 years, he was putting up art exhibits, he was touring, he was on SNL. And that's the most important thing, is that he's still releasing music. I'm still enjoying it. But I'm curious to hear your guys' thoughts. What did you think of this album? What are some of your favorite songs? What were your first impressions? If you compare it to his other solo albums, what do you think? And yeah, just let me know what you think of the album. We do have a couple album reviews in the future. The next 2 albums I'm going to be reviewing when they get released is the new Phoebe Bridgers album and the new Brandon Flowers album. Until then, I do have some more video essays coming out pretty soon. And then hopefully a couple different style of videos. I'm doing a brand new series that I'm going to hopefully premiere soon. And then back to some of my basics like album rankings and who knows, maybe we'll even get Tony back on one of these episodes. But I appreciate you guys watching. And until next time, I hope you take care. Bye-bye.